Max Gorlin, Melbourne Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
This is Nat Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club.
Trent Cotchin from the Richmond Footy Club.
Scott Pendlebury from the Collingwood Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club.
It's Rory Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows.
This is Tom Mitchell. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Your 2025 fantasy footy season, if it wasn't well and truly underway, you probably could say it is now. The positions are locked and revealed for the upcoming fantasy footy season. And on this episode, here at the Coaches Panel, we are going to talk about all the big gains, the holds, the losses, answer some of your questions, and talk all thing positions for fantasy football across whatever platform you play. AFL Fantasy SuperCoach, Dream Team, and the groundbreaking new draft platform Keeper. All of that on this episode. Joining me, though, from the Coaches Panel, a fellow, if you're watching the video, a fellow merch ripper on this episode, by the way. So looking very tidy, my friend. If you want to get your hands on some brand new Coaches Panel merch, you can. All the details in the description of this episode. But Jordox, the positions have landed. The draft is done. While not all the pieces of the puzzle have landed just yet for our starting squads, we are inching very, very close to it, aren't we?
We are, mate. Good to be on. Good to see you again. Yeah, it's starting to take shape, isn't it? Well, this is sort of the last piece of the puzzle just about for 2024 in terms of, as you said, the draft was last week. Now we've got positions. And yeah, it's fun because it's that time of year where some people start to switch off, and now we're switching back on and starting to think about things. So looking forward to going through what probably isn't a really surprising list of changes, but certainly plenty to discuss, and will provide some interesting strategies for next season.
I think there's a fair summation that the community is much more educated, might be too far of the stretch of a term, but the visibility of data and information, the ability to extract it for us. It was years, even just 3 to 4 years ago, you were waiting with bated breath for this time of year, wondering if this player might have done enough. Whereas with the amount of data and tracking and information that's now out there are still some position day surprises that landable. We'll talk about them, whether they're gains, holds, or losses. But for the most part, when we've looked through the positions that have landed, I think the community went, yeah, that feels right. And that's probably a good sign, isn't it, Jordox? Gone are the days where you see a position, you'd be like, what the heck is that? Yeah. There's no real surprises in this list.
There's not, but there's still going to be interesting feedback regardless, because it's the world we live in. It is cool to have the info. Sometimes I think that, this age of information that we're in, it'd be nice to have some surprises, but this is the way it is. And, it's brilliant. There's lots of people on the likes of X and Facebook putting out content and really good information so that we are informed. And like you said, not only are we informed, but we understand, hopefully to a point, why positions have landed the way they have.
All right, well, here's the thing with the positions. There are some that have gained, some that have lost, some that have moved on. They sit across all of your fantasy football formats, so SuperCoach, Dream Team, AFL Fantasy. They all function off the base of champion data and are now one in the same. When one changes positions with a dual position in season, all three of them do that. Well, the Keeper platform that is open for early access, and genuinely it's the only way you want to be playing drafts in 2025 is on Keeper. They have announced, yes, they will start with the base positions that are out and available for public, but they'll be doing some of their own stuff during the season. We here at the Coaches Panel, stay tuned to this channel. Any single time a player gains a position in Keeper, we'll be sharing them with you. Let's talk about the gains in the forward lines. Well, we do need to address the midfields and the rucks politely. It's the pickups in our forward line and in our back line, Jordox, that really have us interested, that have fantasy relevance across the platform. And there are a bunch of players that have gained forward status, but for the sake of relevancy, there's really one big name. Hef from the Keeper League pod first put him on the radar probably a good 8 weeks or so ago, and was very, very strong on, hey, the franchise, the Hornet, Jason Horn-Francis is looking likely to pick up mid-forward status. And Mate, we're going to walk into 2025 with the former number one pick, available for the second time in 3 years, available in our forward lines.
We are. And it's a gift. It's a gift that we needed. We needed a big name, and I know he's young, but what he averaged last year, a touch under 90. I think we can all see
depending
the
on the
talent.
format, give or take, yeah.
Yeah, of course. And we can all see what he's building into. You know, I think it's not a stretch to say he's a Paddy Dangerfield sort of 2.0 in a sense, in the way his fantasy career that trajectory will probably go. So it's really exciting. And before we did the pod tonight, MJ, I had to take my keeper hat off because I am in full keeper mode and put my salary cap hat back on. As a keeper owner of Horn Francis, I was doing cartwheels at the news. But as a classic, as someone playing classic next year, I think he's going to be very, very popular.
It's going to be interesting to see how people handle their forward lines. And I do want to talk about forward lines and strategies in a moment, knowing full well it's November. The prices haven't landed, which is really important for us if there are any rule or trading changes that have happened to the game. So it is way too early to get too far down the road with strategies. But let's be honest, if you're checking out this episode, chances you're on the more hardcore side of fantasy footy coach than others. So your probably brain's already thinking about it anyway.
If you listen to a fantasy pod in November, you're certainly on the more hardcore side of things, I would have thought. Yeah,
it's either that or you're bored, isn't it? They're really the only two kind of options that it presents for you. But I think you're right. Hornet will be right up in the mix for one of the most popular starting top-end forward options. There's not a heap of 80-plus in AFL Fantasy Dream Team Keeper or 90-plus in SuperCoach averaging forward. So anyone that you think's got the scope of pushing that 100 marker comes into consideration. I'm with you. I think Hornet's going to sit in that. Whether or not he's overpicked or underpicked, we'll get to that conversation throughout the preseason. Look, there are the relevant gains we could put there, but a Daniel Curtin's probably going to slide under the radar a little bit for people. Jordox, I know you've got your coaches panel hat on, literally speaking at the moment, but from a Crows perspective, they're pretty bullish internally, not only Crows fans, but inside Westlakes, that Dan Curtin's going to be a pretty staple part of this side, not just for many years to come, but for as early as this year, and as a pretty close to likely bargain basement forward. He could be a handy bench option, if nothing else, with picking up forward status.
Yeah, a lot of frustrated Crows fans last year. I wasn't, or this year rather, 24, about how he was used. I was happy for it to be a slowly approach. But the flip of that is it's good news for the fantasy world because he will be cheap. I assume he'll still be basically rookie priced, and he has forward status. So when he does get on the field for the Crows, I think long term they see him as a midfielder. So it probably doesn't even matter. I'm not talking about him as an F6 type, but certainly as a cash cow. I'm not sure what the options are in the forward line. We're not going to know probably until the preseason has really got started on what our options are going to be for the cash cows. But certainly Curtin is a name that, pricked my interest when I saw he had got forward status.
Yeah, I think the names that exited this previous season and are now landing in 25 that had forward eligibility to their name is really where the relevance conversation needs to sit. Brand new St Kilda player Jack McRae, he's a pure forward in 2025. Mateus Philippou was a pure forward last year. He's a mid forward, and had he not got that late season injury, we might have been looking at him as a pure midfielder only. So again, last season's pain can be this coming season's reward for us. Dylan Moore, no surprises, maintains forward status, as does Isaac Rankin. Luke Jackson, there was some thought in the community he might drift out of dual position status and be a pure ruck, but he's just hit the threshold. According to Champion Data, he's going to be a ruck forward for us. New Bulldog Matt Kennedy is a mid forward. Darcy Wilson probably caught a few people off guard that he was eligible again as a forward, but for keeper and draft coaches especially, that could be a little bit of a gift. Jai Simpkin, Riley Sanders, all these guys maintain mid-forward status. And then who many think is going to be one of the most gimme lay down Mazaire selections in our salary caps. Caleb Daniel also holds mid-forward status, even if he's not likely to play there next year. It's this pool of players that is largely going to be our M1 to 6. Of course, the other franchise, the mullet himself, Bailey Smith, maintains mid-forward status. He was never losing it. It's probably that list of 10 or 12 players that I listed through there that alongside a Jason Horne-Francis are going to be the most relevant names fighting for positions in our starting squad, isn't it?
Definitely. And that there's a big crop, and you mentioned most of them there, of guys who held forward status, but also in the trade period found new homes. So we got Matt Kennedy, Caleb Daniel, Liam Baker, Jack McRae, and then even Jack Graham, who's found a new home at West Coast. In the right role, he could be a real fantasy scorer. So, there's going to be a lot of options, and it's going to be a real hot watch over the summer to see which ones are burning up the track, as they always say. But yeah, I think I'm not going to say we're spoilt for choice, because we're certainly not at the top end. But part of the fun of the game, particularly Classic, is picking those mid prices that are going to end up as top 6. So if you can nail, 2 or 3 out of those guys that we've just sort of talked about, and they go on to be top 6 guys, what a leg up you've got in the competition already.
Yeah, it's true. Look, the other name that has some relevance in the community is Luke Parker. Again, he'll be priced at his 2022 or 2023 average, not his 2024, should I say. It's always the previous 2 due to the injury setback and missed chunk of the year with suspension, but he won't be priced off what he did for us last year. So there's a bunch of names, but I think people in the community, I do want to talk strategy and some losses in a second, but I think politely when it comes to our forward lines this year, it's going to be similar to what we experienced in 2023. And what I mean by that is not premiums from F1 to F5, but I think what we all learnt and took away from last year was, man, we kind of all ended up picking a pretty similar pool of players. Like it was Cornelio, Taranto, Dunkley, Rosie, Butters. It was like, man, pick 4 of those 5. That's your starting squad. Goulden was the other one from that year. And away you go. Whereas last year, there was that experimentation. It was Heaney, and then it kind of diverged a lot from there. But I think just looking through those names, there does feel like a way too early crowd bias towards, okay, Bailey Smith, value I can't ignore, he's in. The narrative around McRae back in the mid and value, he's in. Philippou, the narrative of him in the mids last year, super value, he's in. Horne-Francis,
Caleb,
probably the best.
Daniel.
Caleb Daniel, all of that. It does feel like it is November, but the community in their mind has already gone, forward line locked. Let's experiment in the other positions a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing with the forward line, I should have gone and looked into the history of this, but I know last year the number 1 forward didn't start as a forward in AF and DT anyway. I'm not sure about SuperCoach World, but Zorko was number 1, was he not?
Yeah, he had forward status last year to start the year, but yeah, I know what you're saying.
He did start. My mistake. Yeah, so I guess, but what my point is, the number 1 or number 2 forward may not have forward status just yet. And that's where loading up on all the mid prices and stocking up, or do you hold fire and wait and see who's going to be the top forwards? Because you're right. Right now, it's going to be Bailey Smith, it's going to be Horne-Francis, it's going to be McRae. But if you start them all, you're not leaving much wiggle room. So, did Flanders start as a forward? I feel like someone picked up forward status last year and went on with it. Maybe I'm just...
It has been the case in previous years. Not as much last year, but definitely over previous seasons we did see that to be true.
You know what I think? I think what my point was, Zorko had forward status, but he picked up a new role for Brisbane when Coleman went down. I think that's what I was driving at. So the number 1 forward may be in there, but we may be waiting on a role change for him to pop.
I think both of those points that you made are really quite true and hold a lot of water for us in that regards, that the best forward option might still be to come. And as we talked about at the start, the positions are only a piece of our strategy and starting squad pie. The prices, the discounts that come, chasing value in the right lines, these as much as who is available inform how you go about building your starting squad. Of the players in the forward line that we're saying farewell to, at least for now, if not forever, Isaac Heaney, Dane Zorko, Caldwell, Flanders, all are heading off into other positions. In fact, mids or defender, basically, between those four. And then of the relevant last year, probably weren't going to be this year. But if they'd held forward status, we might have looked at them. Powell, Dempsey, Peatling, the new Crow. Probably if James Peatling had maintained forward status, which was always a stretch. If that was to come, he's a pure mid now. That probably would have catapulted him even more in people's interest if he was maintaining that mid-forward status.
Definitely. I was hoping he'd hold it, even though we knew he wouldn't. But I think he would have been he might even still be a smart pick at the price as a pure mid. But I digress.
Yeah, I think so. Look, the forward line. I said it 2 minutes ago. We're going to have very similar names and very similar selection cadence through there. I can't see a lot of deviation. Like a player like a Dylan Moore, for example, you go, well, how much upside is there for him from that position? And Isaac Rankin, how much upside of scoring is there from him? And is it worth paying up at this 90-plus sort of average or high 80 sort of average when you've got the Daniel, the McRae, the Philippou, these kind of guys with embedded value and proven runs on the board in these new positions and new teams? I do feel like it's going to be a pretty standard forward line, which is okay. It just means separation's got to come from other parts of the ground. Let's head into the back line then. We've already mentioned a couple of forwards last year that are defensive eligible for us. Flanders is a defender mid for us, so he's lost the mid-forward status. He's just flipped the other end of the ground. Zorko was a mid-forward last year. He's now a pure defender. Those are the two big premiums based off last year's scoring that have hit our back line. And then probably the name that I think people are secretly more excited about than they'd like to let on, but they've got a lot of unknowns about what this team is going to do, especially under a new coach and a failed premiership tilt last year. Let's be honest, 17 teams had a failed premiership tilt, so it's unfair on Sydney to just put it on them. But Callum Mills is a pure defender. If he can get back to a key distribution role or back in the guts, this could be an absolute barnstorming selection for a lot of the community.
Yeah, I'm not even sure if there's ifs there. I think once his body's right, we're going to be reminded just how good a player he is. So he obviously missed huge amount of the season, and when he came in 2024, he was clearly going to be underdone and just sort of ran out of time to make a charge to play in the finals, or at least in the grand final. Change of coach, I don't think really impacts. It'll be more about his position, but I think if he's off half-back, like you said, distributing role, or if he's pure mid again, or a bit of a mix of the two, I think he's going to be really good, and he's certainly going to be value, and probably one of the... I reckon once we get to, February and everyone's locking in round one sides, I think he'll be one of the first picked in the back line.
Yeah, all he needs to do is have a preseason and a defined role, and the community will flock, because depending on the salary cap format you play, he's going to be undeniable value based on just what 2 seasons ago he went back-to-back 110-plus seasons across the format. So on his day, he's up at the top of fantasy scorers for us, that's for sure. Some names that held defensive eligibility, Jordox. Again, I don't think there was too many surprising departures, and we'll get to those that have in a minute, but Nick Martin, pure defender. Part of me wouldn't have been shocked if he held DPP, but I understand the pure defensive decision from Champion Data. Lockie Whitfield's a defender for us. Harry Sheasel's a pure defender. Again, another I thought was going to be a defender mid, but let's take the advantage because if he spends enough time forward for us during the season, maybe we might jag him in the forward line. So let's be a little optimistic about how this might play out for us. Dan Houston, the new Magpie, defensive eligibility, Nazia Wanganeen-Millerer, Jack Sinclair always finds a way to keep his defensive status. And then another defender that's flying under the radar a little bit. You mentioned about players that changed clubs, but Harry Perryman, the new Magpie, was a defender for us last year, has got some fantasy chops about him. Again, we want to see the defined role, but it's probably getting a little bit of disrespect on his name with the lack of conversations, albeit way too early in the 2025 preseason, because if he's got that right spot in that Magpie midfield, especially as a defender, this could be a little handy option for us.
Yeah, he's not going to have to do too much, really, to be a good pick. As a stepping stone pick, not a long-term sort of guy, because he'll be super cheap, yeah? I'm not sure what his average was, but I remember looking at it and thinking, if he gets defender status, he'll be one of those cheaper sort of mid-price guys to look at. And I think part of the pitch from Collingwood was a little bit of midfield time, which is, I think, what he was hoping to get at the Giants. So, yeah, again, another pick that if he's looking good in pre-season and he's in their opening round squad, it's going to be hard not to pick him as well. So,
there's
always plenty of options. There's another guy that is defender mid that I think is a curious one next year. Max Holmes, I think you got to ask the question. He has to go well over 100 to be sort of value, but I just think we only saw the beginning of what he can be in the fantasy world and for Geelong. And he's obviously got that defender mid status, so he's another one I'll be keeping an eye on. And then you've got the two Roberts boys, not related, I'm pretty sure. So Archie Roberts at Essendon, what an incredible debut late in the year.
Great little run.
Completely destroy his price. But geez, if you're bullish that he can just continue, he could be one. And then over at Sydney is Matt Roberts, who's well and truly kicked Jake Lloyd out of that spot in the back half. So he's another guy that could be a smart pick that's only going to get better.
Yeah, it's certainly the case. We'll talk about a lot of those potential names and more right throughout the preseason, because January 1 is when we drop 50 player episodes over 50 days, whether it be an audio podcast or a video. The 50 most relevant is the preseason series that is for every serious fantasy footy coach. Whether you play the salary caps of AFL Fantasy Dream Team SuperCoach, or you're just a draft nut, single season or keeper, every single day I'll host a conversation about one specific player, be joined by guests from not only the coaches panel, but also guests from across the fantasy footy community, put a player under the microscope, look at what makes them relevant, give you our take on this player, leave you with a resulting reflection upon them, even a draft range. We give you all that. And it's not just a random assortment of player profiles. It is ranked to scale who I think are the most relevant players. It is absolutely a series you want to be involved in, and that all starts on January 1. I might need to get cracking on the list soon, Jordox. Some names that have lost out of our defensive lines, though. No surprises to any of these names. Nick Dacos is a pure mid for us, as is Jack Crisp. He always finds a way to get back in that defensive line, doesn't it? So, keeper coach, don't be too disappointed. He'll probably be back there within about 3 to 5 months' time, so that will be fine. Hayden Young, again, shouldn't shock any owners or people that wanted to own him in this coming season. He's a pure mid. Elliot Yeo is another that understandably spent almost exclusively his games last year as a pure mid. He's locked away in that position. And then another that we talked about, these players that have moved clubs. If he'd held defensive status, right up the radar in relevance, but probably might fall under it a little bit now that he's just a pure mid. He's had some seasons of 90 plus across the formats. New free agent landing at the Crows. If he gets a distribution role there, even without the defensive status, still might be relevant for us.
That's right, Isaac Cumming, the new Crow, the man. I actually think the fact that he lost defender status it kind of makes it more appealing to me. You know, those who went with, was it Nick Dacos this year who started mid-only, but we all kind of knew or felt like he would get the defender status, and those who took a punt on him as a mid-only. Different sort of price range, I'm sure. Cumming will be, you know, mid-pricer. But I like the idea of starting him in the midfield if you're confident in what the Crows are doing with him. There'll be an early DPP pickup because, like you said, he's got a 90-odd season in him historically. And, I think the Crows will be trying to get it in his hand. So I like the fact that he's mid-only because very few people will start him. But we could see him blitz the preseason and people will all lock him in at M5 knowing he'll get the defender status. So much can change in the next few months.
Well, we saw that, didn't we, last year? You alluded to Nick Dacos a few years ago as one of those players. Just last year, it was Nick Martin, it was Colby McKerch, it was Max Holmes. These guys we're going to get them because we think it's coming. I'm always a little apprehensive about picking a player that you need 5-6 weeks of data, and a team like Adelaide are very quick to move the magnets around if things aren't winning for them. So that said, it's a consideration you have to have in November, isn't it? Looking at how that lands. Hey, I want to get to some questions that we've asked our Patreons and also put out on X. But before I do, like, first take, you've looked at the positions. They've been sitting on our desktops now and on our tablets and phones for the better part of 24 hours and looking through them. Is there any immediate first thought strategy reflections that come to you as you've looked at it again? We need to wait for the prices, and I can't stress that enough. If you're making starting squad selections without the price, you're not actually letting value in the salary cap sense be the guider of how your squad structure should be, not the positions. Don't fall in love in November and when you're meant to be getting married in March to these players. But is there something that you go, okay, I've seen this, and it's a strategy I'm now going to start to consider either more seriously or hadn't at all before now that you've seen some of these positions?
No, because I think my mindset of how to play the game next year sort of developed more in the AFL trade period because, again, we talked about all those forwards that change clubs. Pretty much all of them have fantasy scoring in them. They've just been held back by role pretty much at the club or lack of game time or whatever it may be. So I guess my first insights when the positions dropped were pretty similar to what I've been thinking for a month now, is that the forward line's actually okay. Yeah, it's not fine. Anywhere near as bad as it probably feels because the very top primos aren't there. So I guess to that point, my thoughts are it's going to run similar to 2024 where you're going to spend a lot of your starting squad elsewhere. And, but beyond that, I haven't, like I said, I've got my keeper hat on and I haven't been thinking about salary just too much. But with the positions out now, I've been able to really think about it, and I think it's going to be pretty similar regarding the forward line. One thing, just quickly, that I love every year is trying to pick the guy who is now pure mid that everyone will be scared of because he doesn't have the forward or defender status. I think if you can nail that, the depart. If you can stick with that guy, and we've seen them in the past, if you can nail that guy as the man in the midfield, it's such a great way to start with your starting squad. But apart from Nick Dacos, there's not really a whole lot of mid-only names like Caldwell or Heaney that are jumping out at me. Hayden Young, guys have lost EP that I'm like, oh, I might start him because everyone's jumped off. Dacos is probably the only one, and I don't think I'm the only one who might start Nick Dacos. So that's probably the only shift I've seen that I've thought of the last couple of days.
Yeah, and fair enough to make that assumption. All right, let's jump into some of our questions before we look to wrap up this episode. If you like Jordox, though, and you've got your head well and truly into keeper, chances are it's because you've been experimenting and exploring your way inside Keeper AFL. It is the brand new draft platform. Whether you play a single season, a keeper, or a dynasty league, Keeper is, well, as far as I'm concerned, the best draft platform you can play. For keeper and dynasty coaches, everything you can think of doing as a commissioner can be done right inside the tool. You can get rid of those pesky spreadsheets. You can make the player moves that are sitting in there. The 2025 player positions are about to be reflected in the game for those that have early access. And really, if you can dream it, Keeper allows you to do it. Incredible customizations, the data history, the player profiling, everything you can think of. Make sure you check it out. All the details about Keeper. We did a launch episode with Ryan, the founder and creator of it, not too long ago. It is on this channel. Just go back and check out the episode. So if you're like, oh, yeah, I should get my head back into the Keeper game now that positions are landed. As a commissioner or a draft player, I should check out Keeper. Absolutely. Go and check it out. Some of the stuff that Ryan and his team have put together is incredible. And yes, the coaches panel will be exclusively dropping any additional player positions that come either in the preseason or during the season proper. Stay tuned to the coaches panel. We're teaming up with Keeper in 2025. It is your one-stop shop. Money can't buy experience, and you've got to be doing your Keeper, Dynasty, or single-season drafts on Keeper. All right, let's hit some of these questions and wrap up the episode. Dane has a question. He says, boys, Dan Curtin, with only the forward status, that a surprise? Not to me.
Nah. I mean, yes and no. I mean, the thing about Curtin was he played so many games as a sub, so his actual minutes on the ground were really low last year. So, yeah, the little bit he got clearly was enough to just swing him all the way forward. But yeah, just look at it as a positive, Dane. He's going to be a cash cow for us.
It makes him more relevant. And you look back at that limited number of games he did play a full game. He was playing as a third key tall for the Crows. So to me, I wasn't surprised at all. So that makes sense. Corey Blackledge, seriously, as a Patreon, every single time I've ever done any form of Q&A, Corey has dropped a question in. So I appreciate you, Corey, for dropping that one. And he says, do we think that for fantasy and SuperCoach, is it just as simple as stack the defense and forward line this year with the options we've got?
Not necessarily with the forward line, like we sort of said before. I think in terms of spending your money, there's not really much to spend it on in the forward line. So I don't know if you can stack it in terms of the salary you use. Stacking it could also be defined as, 3 or 4 mid prices, 2 primos.
Yeah, no rookies on the field, yeah.
Yeah, but I'd like to wait and see on the forward line. Backline, I think the defence, I think you could make an argument that you could stack your defence, definitely, because there's a lot of known quantities back there.
You could stack your defence. Going set and forget is a viable option this year. Not saying it's the option you should take, but it's a viable option this year, and always getting into that upper echelon of uber premium mids is always handy. Whether or not it's valuable in the right starting squad option is another conversation, but if you got the cash, maybe that's the way. Nathan's next up for our Patreon questions. He says, are we surprised why the top-end rookies like Layla and Langford, and to an extent Ashcroft, only had mid status? Ashcroft, for me, absolutely should be a pure mid. There shouldn't even be a conversation. Just you watch what he did at under 18s level, from representing, Vic right through to local football league and Coates. There was pure mid. There was never any going to be a question. Layla and probably more than Langford surprised me a little bit. Jordox, if I'm honest. I don't know about you, but just watching him at under 18s, there was a fair chunk of game he's spending inside forward 50. But I think he's a pretty high certainty to pick it up at that first DPP allocation for the year, if I'm honest.
Yeah, and I'll always defer to you when it comes to the young crop, because I know you followed a lot closer than I do. I wasn't surprised, but I also didn't have a clue. So
Stuart's got a question. He says, now that positions have landed, is there any value type forwards that you could target in a keeper league? Again, value being more likely to not be a top 30 average spot, but present something there. Is anyone at the lower echelons for you, Jordox? You go, I wouldn't mind a piece of that.
Yeah, great question, Stuart. I'm glad you asked it because there was a name that we didn't discuss earlier because it probably wasn't for Classic, but I really liked Elijah Hollins in 2024. Averaged, I think, about 72, Dream Team AF, probably similar SuperCoach. Not really sure what his role is going to look like. I don't think there's going to be a huge opening in the midfield, but certainly there's going to be a gap left by Matt Kennedy as that sort of forward into the midfield, into the wing. Someone that can sort of move around a bit. And, he was a real hot sort of property early days at Gold Coast. He'll be entering his second or third year at Carlton. I just think he could grow a leg this year.
That's fair enough too. All right, let's hit to the Twitter questions. Rowan, an absolute statistical star of the X community and also a Coaches Panel Patreon. He says there's a lot of hype around the North Melbourne recruits. Boys, how many North players could realistically average 95 plus, given they've been ranked 14th, 16th and 18th in AFL fantasy points per game for the last 3 years? For reference, there was 3 last year. It was Sheasel, it was Cherry, and I believe LDU was the other 3. So my first question to you, Jordox, those 3, way too early, let's make a big bold prediction. Are all 3 of those names, LDU, Sheasel and Cherry, going 95 plus this year?
Yeah, they are.
Okay. All right. So then let's see if there are any
How many more?
Yeah. How many more? Does a Caleb Daniel go 95 plus? Again, we're looking at these stats that Rowan shared from us. Probably the lowest over the last 3 years AFL fantasy points per game team. Daniel, another?
I love the question. I think Daniel can. I don't think he will, but he also doesn't have to. So you've got to think of it that way. There's a lot of hype around the recruits because of the value. So Caleb Daniel doesn't even have to get near 95 to be a good pick. And I guess the thing with North too, and North fans will be absolutely hoping this happens, but at some point they're going to start performing better. And I think what they've done to their list, adding Luke Parker, Jack Darling, another year into this brilliant young midfield they've got, I think as a club, as a team, they're going to start scoring more anyway. So who else could go at 95? I could see Wardlaw getting up to a 95. Yeah, as a big jump in a 4th year, is he? 4th or 5th year?
Yeah, I can see a world where that happens.
McKercher, he was close
in the right
to
role.
Yeah. And even Fisher in the right role for long enough could. So, how many could? I'm going to land on 5 for you, Ron.
I can't see any more than 5, but I can't see any less than 3. So maybe let's go 4 and split the difference. But I'm probably sitting in that space. Good question. Jordan Decina, with the arrival of Jaggett Smith in the engine room at Carlton, where do you see Adam Chera fitting in? The average of 72.5 in 24 is certainly unders what he's done recently. Doesn't really have much value as a trade option for keeper. So do you drop or hold in a 12-team keeper, Jordox?
Look, 12-team, that's a decent sized league. I wouldn't be dropping Chera. I think, if anything, I'd be targeting him in a trade sense. If someone else has him and is sick of it, I'd be looking at that. I think it's not about where does he fit in, because I think he does fit in. It's just his body. And if he just gets a run with his body, I think he's going to be, would he average 72.5 for DT and AF?
Yeah, it's about 20 unders what he does when he's fit. Yeah.
Certainly, yeah. So I think they invested a lot in getting him across, and he was really good in his younger days at Freo. It's just his body has let him down. So if his body's right, definitely be keeping him, and I think you're going to be rewarded in 25 with him.
All right, there you go. I'm a trade. I am all off Adam Chera. A 12-team league. Again, it all depends on the caveat of how many coaches are in the league, obviously. But to me, a player like an Adam Chera, you're dropping him at his lowest point. But what is the upside options that you're letting go is always the thing I'd be looking at. And so who are those players you're dropping away? personally, I'd be trying to trade him and move him on. That player with such a poor injury history in a draft and a redraft always kind of slides a round or two in a keeper as well. The arrival of Jagger Smith, I don't think is the direct impact of Chera. I think it's how much do you trust his body is the real concern. I think I agree with you on that, Jordox. It's Jagger's going to get opportunities, but it's not going to be the displacement reason for
So with
Chera.
Chera, you'd look to trade him out, but you wouldn't drop him. Would that be fair to say?
Without knowing who else is on the list, it's sitting on the fence, but yeah, I'd probably drop him. In a 12 keepers, like that's, let's say it's a 10-team league.
I read that as a 12-team league, so I guess it depends. If he's only keeping 12 players, yeah, maybe.
And it's 10 coaches, is Adam Chera inside the top 120 valuable prospects to have in a keeper league? To me, he's not in the top 150. And so if it's a 10-team league and you're keeping 12 players, just by law of averages, sorry, Adam, you're gone. At best, he's a 90s guy. I don't see a pathway for him to becoming a 100-plus guy. Why would I drop who's a bad illustration? A Riley Sanders. It's a terrible illustration point, but why would I drop a guy that might have the opportunity, and I'm forecasting to be 100 mid, as opposed to a guy that I go, I know what Chera is. A 90s guy at best and injury prone, and it doesn't matter what seems to be changing. Nothing's changing. I just cut my losses. I'd try to trade, and if I couldn't, then I'd drop him. But I'm a bit more ruthless sometimes. Kai's jumped in off the back of Rowan's question about North Melbourne. He says he doesn't see there being any value for the whole North squad other than Daniel, Sheasel, O'Sullivan, Cherry. So the only recruits he'd be looking at is O'Sullivan and Daniel. I'm not big on O'Sullivan for fantasy this year. I'm just not. He's a high impact, low possession type of midfielder, and it's a midfield that's relatively stacked. If you followed the draft commentary throughout September, October, and November from Cal Toomey and others that were commenting on it, up until probably about a week and a half before the draft, it was they're splitting pick two. They don't need another mid. And it's because you mentioned all those names that are rolling through there. He is a point of difference midfielder for them. He's a much more impactful player. He can go forward, take overhead marks, kick goals, but he doesn't need 30 possessions to carve you up. He just needs 10 to 15. He's just that prolific of when he gets the ball, he'll hurt you, not prolific with how often he wins the ball. So I'm off O'Sullivan this year. I would have him late on my keeper draft prospects of this crop. There are others that I'd have. For me, I've got no interest in O'Sullivan at all this year. I know it's early, but we're in the interest of making predictions. There any other North guys you're looking at?
Very high price.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah. Look, Luke Parker, I don't think is a starting player. I think let him find his feet, drop a little bit of coin, and then maybe he could hit some form and you could jump on. I also don't see Cherry as being value. I think he's going to be extremely expensive, but, pretty hard not to start him after how much fun owners had if they had him at the right time last year.
For me, what I'm looking at North Melbourne is who's got those distribution roles. Daniel and who else? That is what I'm looking at. They're probably the North Melbourne players I'm of most interest in heading into 2025. We know what Cherry's going to be. Whether or not it's to the peak of last year or not is a conversation we'll have throughout January, February, and March, that is for sure. Nathan's got a question. He said, who of these mid-forwards has the biggest upside? Elijah Hewitt, Riley Garcia, Hugo Garcia, or Neil Erasmus? Who's got the biggest upside?
I think Erasmus has the biggest upside. I'm not seeing it happening at Freo. So if he'd found a new home in the off-season, he's got that forward status too. But I think Elijah Hewitt probably out of that list. He's another guy who's just been injured. Yeah, I'm pretty sure forward he's eligible. Had a pretty wretched run. But again, I think I read something somewhere. And I love it because it's already a lot of the players, the first 1 to 4 year players are back on the track. And already I'm seeing little bits on X, and I'm like, oh, that's good to know. But I did hear somewhere that he is looking really fit, Elijah Hewitt. So out of the four for 2025, it would be Hewitt, but for the whole career, probably a mix between him and Erasmus.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. Last two questions for us. Dio says, who is your first picked rookie defender, and why is it defender mid Saad El Halwal? Why is that? The bomber.
I'll defer to you again on the rookies. I have not get my head around the rookies yet.
His value, I think he's a good pick. I think it absolutely will be probably people's D6, 7, and 8 in the starting squads when the formats open up. I don't think he's best 22 assured, but he's one preseason away from pushing into that spot. So, Saad,
was he the mid-year pickup?
That's him. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So
did he
really
play?
Talented guy. No, but really talented.
He didn't get a game.
In the squad a little bit, but never really played last year in terms of AFL.
He was hot in the VFL, wasn't he?
He was hot in the VFL and got plenty of opportunities. Yeah. I think he will play this year. It's just whether or not he's going to be the must-have rookie defender. There's a lot to go under the bridge before we get there. But Dio,
I'll make him my first pick defender rookie. Dio, there you go.
There you go. All right, he's locked it in. Last one, Jordox. He says, with the strength of midfielders from the draft, can you run 4 rookies on the field in the midfield, especially with so many best 18 rounds? Jordox, the answer is you could do a lot of things, but until the positions land to see where the value sits, starting to marry yourself to a 4 rookie structure in any particular line, just don't even do that to yourself. Like, don't put any currency into that right now, because as simple as this, we are within a week of some of the prices starting to get leaked out of the formats. Depending on the platform you're in, we're 2 to 3 weeks away. AFL Fantasy sort of opened last year in mid-December. Historically, it's also had some times opening in mid-January, but they do seem to want to get in and be the first open-for-all platform, which we love that they do that. It means we've all got a platform we can get involved in. And SuperCoach and Dream Team for assistant coach or gold subscribers, often about a week or two before Christmas, they're opened. So really, Jordox, we're 7 to 10 days, depending on the time you're listening or watching this episode, from us knowing the prices, the magic number, being able to figure things out. I don't think with the value that I'm forecasting, you will need to run 4 on-field rookie mids. I think you're going to leave yourself a bit too thin. I think there's going to be so much value in all areas of the ground that you just don't need to do that. And that's not even if you're like, anti-mid-price madness, even Guns and Rooks approach. I think the value will be so high that you just don't need to go there.
I think just to finish on that, for Jordox's question, I think the essence of the question is, can you, because of the strength of the draft? And I think
you can.
The strength of the draft, and we're going to have a lot of good choices that could be on field. It's more like MJ, you're saying, I think you're going to want to spend up in the midfield because there's going to be so much value elsewhere. So I don't think you're going to start with 4 on-field rookies in the midfield, but you could do it based on the strength of the draft that we've just seen.
Yeah, you certainly could. It's got some feelings of when GWS and Gold Coast came into the league when we had just an abundance of plethora of rookies, and Richmond are the team that's going to give us so many cash cows this year, not just from the teams this year, but there's been a couple on the list that still haven't got an opportunity that they'll want to give that to. So to me, yes, you can do many things. Whether or not you should is probably a whole new conversation. So the positions are out, Jordox. Prices, we've mentioned, start to leak over the next week or so. While AFL Fantasy haven't confirmed when they will be open to public, history recently suggests mid-December is now their aim, and whether or not that lands to be determined. SuperCoach and Dream Team, assistant coaches and gold subscribers, it's known. About 10 days before Christmas, that bad boy opens up for you. For the rest of the populace, mid-January, that's when it really opens up. Keeper, well, that's the draft platform that's open right now. If you've subscribed and got early access, you can load your teams in there right now. You can start allocating the picks. You can even start trading. The drafting capabilities are not turned on yet. It is in off-season mode, but all the things you want to be doing as a keeper league and a dynasty coach, you can do right now. So that is the landscape of what sits. And the next thing for us, Jordox, is to wait for the prices to see what changes come in the rules and the fixturings that the games give us, where the value really sits, and then we can start to really build our salary strategies, can't we?
We can, and that was probably the one thing we didn't talk about, and that preceded the draft was the dropping of the fixture and what opening round's going to look like and what the early buys are going to look like, and the fact that there's now 5 mid-season buys. It's a lot to get your head around, but all of that will make up the pie that you said earlier about all the different pieces before we can then sit down and say, right, what does my starting squad in 25 look like? But we're getting close to it. Just got to get through Christmas and all that stuff, and then before we know it, mate, it's going to be here, and I can't bloody wait.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it, mate. As always, a pleasure to talk fantasy footy with you, buddy.
Thanks, mate. Good to be on.
If you want to go and check out any of the episodes that we dropped right throughout the off-season, whether it be the player-by-player trade and free agency reviews, a fixture analysis, and more, wherever you're checking out this channel, you can go back and check that out. So if you're only just re-emerging from your fantasy footy hiatus and going, oh, have I missed anything? Yeah, there's dozens of episodes for you to go back out and check out, so you can make sure you do that. Over the coming weeks, as the pricing starts to leak, we'll be dropping that over on YouTube over the next couple of weeks. Keep an eye on it. I'll be sharing my way too early best lineups for SuperCoach and AFL Fantasy for the upcoming season. Once the positions are locked away with prices and the team pickers are out and AFL Fantasy is out, we'll start doing our way too early team reviews. And then, as I mentioned, January 1, the 50 most relevant. If you're a part of the coaches panel for more than one preseason, you know it, you love it. It's a staple of how you get yourself into preseason. If you've just discovered the coaches panel in the off-season or during season 2024, trust me, this may just be your favorite series you've ever gotten from us. The 50 most relevant, I'm almost done with the list. I'm almost happy with it. And from January 1, it all drops. Hey, thanks so much for tuning in. If you like this episode and you're watching on YouTube, comment below and let us know what player positions surprised you, and if it's changed any of the players that are in your starting squad selections. Turn the notifications on if you haven't already done so that every time we drop an episode, your device pings and go and check out some Coaches Panel. If you're listening to this as an audio podcast, make sure you subscribe, give it a 5-star rating, and inside the description of this episode is a ton of really important information for you. It's where you can get in touch with us across social media. X, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok is where you can find us on those platforms. If you want to become a part of our Patreon, gain exclusive early access to a bunch of different things and hidden rewards and group chats and more, all the details for that are in our description, as well as the link to get yourself some fresh Coaches Panel merch, so that before season 25 gets underway, not only are you repping the Coaches Panel and supporting us, but you're looking good while you do it. Hey, thanks so much for tuning in. Season 2025 is well and truly building through the preseason. We can't wait to be back with you again real soon, talking about your fantasy footy season to come.